Okay, let's dive in. So picture this. You're walking through maybe a dusty old dungeon, could be an abandoned house,
Yeah.
and you spot something ordinary, like a sturdy-looking chest, maybe a chair that looks kind of comfy, or even just a statue in the corner.
Right. Familiar territory.
Exactly. And you get that little flicker, don't you? That tiny bit of suspicion.
Yeah.
Hardwired.
Well, today we're digging into why that feeling exists, especially in certain places. We're doing a deep dive into mimics. They're basically the ultimate masters of turning everyday stuff into, well, a deadly surprise.
And we've got some really fascinating source material here. It goes way beyond just, a chest with teeth. These descriptions, they detail their true form, which is genuinely bizarre,
Okay.
and their shape-shifting abilities, how they hunt, the mechanics behind it all. It really paints a picture of why they're such a uniquely deceptive kind of threat. So our mission today is to unpack all of that. We'll look at what mimics really are, how they pull off these disguises, and what you really need to understand to maybe avoid becoming, well, lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's start with what they actually are, because the sources, they suggest something way stranger than just like an animated object.
Yeah, the natural form described in these sources, it's really something else. Forget objects. They're described as basically roaming stomachs.
Roaming stomachs.
Amorphous, kind of blobby bodies. And they're covered in these like alien-looking eyes and teeth. Just this massive organs moving around.
Whoa, okay. That is definitely not the image you usually get. We think of the chest, right? That opens up, reveals the teeth inside. You're saying the default is just a blob with eyes.
That's the baseline, according to this material,
Sure.
which really highlights how powerful their main ability is, this active transformation. They can fundamentally change their color, their texture, even their dimensions
Wow.
to perfectly copy an inanimate object, as long as it's roughly their size.
So that blob can look exactly like a wooden door or a stone pillar. Seriously.
That's what the sources say. And this shape-shifting, it serves a really specific kind of brutal purpose. It's camouflage, obviously letting them hide right out in the open.
Right, blending in.
But maybe even more important, it's bait. They make themselves look like something you'd approach without thinking, or maybe something you actively want to approach, like that treasure chest.
Hiding in plain sight by being the lure. That's clever. And deeply unsettling. So where do you actually run into these things?
Well, the sources mention the usual suspects, like the Underdark, Deep Gaze, that kind of thing.
Makes sense.
But interestingly, also urban environments. So yeah, that crate you see in a city alley might not be just a crate.
Oh, great. Nowhere is safe.
Pretty much. And there's this cryptic note in the sources about them containing any treasure. Which, thinking about their diet, probably just means whatever their last victim was carrying.
Ugh, grim detail. Okay, so they're predatory blobs. They can look like almost anything their size. Let's talk about that anything part, because the list of potential forms here is, well, it's long.
Yeah, the versatility is really emphasized. It's not just one or two classic traps. They can mimic a huge range of objects.
You mentioned the everyday stuff.
Absolutely. The ones you'd expect are listed. Chair, table, door, chest, keg.
Mm-hmm.
Even something as simple as a floor mat.
Things you'd barely even notice.
Exactly. You'd just walk right up, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But it's not just furniture. They can go bigger, more imposing. Things like a sarcophagus, a throne, a sculpture, an obelisk, even gravestone.
Things you might look at, maybe even touch, but you're definitely not expecting them to bite back.
Right. Or maybe even worse from a luring perspective, things that seem harmless or even inviting. The list includes an oversized cake.
A cake? Seriously, that's just cruel.
Tell me about it. Or a heap of leaves, a potted plant, a row of books, things that draw you in or you wouldn't think twice about reaching for.
It really plays on our assumptions, doesn't it?
Completely. And they can even mimic things you might need to interact with, like a panel of levers, a ship's wheel, a ladder, a bell, maybe a sign.
Imagine needing to pull a lever to open a door, and the lever itself grabs you.
Yeah. Or ringing a bell for service and...
Yeah.
But, well, you get the idea.
Wow. Okay, so the paranoia needs to extend way beyond just treasure chests. It's furniture, it's decor, it's essential fixtures, potentially anything.
Right down to things in the environment itself, like a stalagmite is mentioned, perfect camouflage in a cave. Huh. Or a weapon rack.
You reach for a sword and...
The rack takes a chunk out of your hand.
Yeah.
It hammers home that the disguise isn't just passive hiding. It's an active hunting tool. It's bait, pure and simple.
Okay, so that brings us to the moment of truth. You've fallen for the disguise, you're close. How does the hunt actually go down? What happens next?
Well, the sources say they wait. incredible patience, just sitting there in object form. Remember, their actual movement speed isn't great, only 20 feet according to the stats, so they rely on you coming to them.
Makes sense for an ambush predator.
That patience pays off. Once you're in range, the trap springs. It's not super complex. They just lash out.
With those features you mentioned, the pseudopods, the teeth.
Exactly. Often it's the sticky pseudopod first.
Yeah.
The stats say it's a +5 to hit, 5-foot reach. It does 7 points of bludgeoning damage. But the real kicker is the extra 4 points of acid damage, and it can grapple you if you're large size or smaller.
Grappled. Okay, that's bad.
It is. And getting out isn't easy. It's a DC 13 strength check to escape. And the sources specifically mention you have disadvantage on that check.
Disadvantage. Ouch. Okay, but isn't there something else that makes just touching them dangerous? The adhesive thing?
Yes, the adhesive trait. Absolutely crucial. This only works when they're in their object form, but if anything huge or smaller just touches the mimic.
Like sits on the chair, tries to open the chest, steps on the mat.
Exactly. You adhere to it, instantly grappled. Same tough DC 13 escape, same disadvantage on the check. You're just stuck.
So it's not even necessarily an attack that gets you. You can trap yourself just by interacting normally with what looks like an object. That disadvantage on escaping, when you're literally stuck to the thing, that's rough.
It really locks you down. And that's the setup for the bite. The sources detail their bite attack, also +5 to hit, 5-foot reach. Normally it does 7 piercing damage.
Okay.
However, and this is where the grapple becomes really deadly.
Yeah.
If you are grappled, whether by the pseudopod or just being stuck to it, the mimic gets advantage on its bite attack roll.
Yeah.
And the damage jumps up significantly because 12 piercing damage, plus it adds another 4 points of acid damage on top of that.
Whoa. Okay, so step 1, get stuck, either via the adhesive or a pseudopod grab. Step 2, the teeth come in, hit more easily, do almost double damage, and splash you with more acid.
It's a nasty, efficient sequence designed to incapacitate you quickly. Once you're stuck, you're in serious trouble.
Yeah, you're not getting away easily, and you're taking heavy hits.
Classic ambush predator stuff.
Yeah.
Really perfected. And the sources also note what happens after they, finish a meal.
They just stay there.
Nope. They usually relocate, change their form into something else, find a new spot, and just wait again. They're not tied down. They're mobile traps.
Resetting the snare somewhere else. Huh. Okay, let's look under the hood a bit. The sources give us the stats, the mechanics. What do these numbers tell us about them?
All right, looking at the blog, they're classified as a medium monstrosity, and their alignment is neutral.
So not inherently evil, just hungry.
Pretty much. Just driven by that predatory instinct. Defensively, their armor class is 12. Not super tough, kind of squishy maybe. But the disguise itself might offer some protection.
Right.
Their hit points are 58. That's calculated as 9d8 plus 18. It's decent. They can take a few hits once the fight starts.
Okay, so not super fragile.
No. And their speed, like we said, only 20 feet. They're not chasing you across the room if you manage to break free and run.
So surviving that initial grab or stick is paramount. What about skills? Anything they're good at?
One key skill, stealth. They get a +5 bonus. That's the mechanical representation of how good their camouflage is.
Makes sense. That helps them hide in plain sight.
Exactly. It makes them genuinely hard to spot before they reveal themselves, even if you're being careful. Their passive perception is only 11, though. So while they hide well, they aren't necessarily noticing every little thing around them unless they're actively looking, I guess, which might be hard for a blob.
Yeah. What about their core abilities? Strength, intelligence.
Okay, so strength is high 17. That gives them a +3 bonus, which feeds into their attack rolls, their grapple effectiveness, and their damage. Makes sense for something that grabs and bites hard.
Right.
But importantly, their intelligence is low. Like really low, only 5.
Yeah.
And charisma is also low at 8.
What does that tell us?
It reinforces that idea of them being primal, instinctual predators. They're not cunning masterminds. They're driven by the need to feed. They aren't making complex plans or trying to bargain with you.
So the fancy throne isn't secretly plotting to overthrow the kingdom.
No, it just wants to eat the person sitting on it. Simple as that.
Got it. Any resistances or immunities mentioned?
Yeah, a couple interesting ones. Acid immunity and prone immunity.
Acid immunity. Probably related to their own digestive juices or something.
That seems likely, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense biologically. And immunity to being knocked prone. Well, how do you knock a blob over? Or a chest, for that matter. They don't really have legs in the usual sense.
True. Makes sense. And languages. Can they talk?
Nope. Sources say languages. None. Again, fits the purely predatory creature profile.
Okay. And finally, they have a combat rating, right? A CR.
Yep, listed as CR2, challenge rating 2. This gives you an idea of the threat level, sort of a moderate challenge, especially for, say, less experienced adventurers or anyone caught off guard.
So dangerous, but maybe not a world-ending threat on its own.
Right. The CR really reflects that ambush potential. They punch above their weight if they get the drop on you, but in a straight-up fight where you know what you're facing, maybe less overwhelming.
And that shape-shifting. How fast can they do it? Change from a chest back to a blob or into something else.
Good point. The sources say it's a bonus action.
Oh, that's quick.
Yeah, it's significant. It means within a single round of combat, they can pop out of disguise, attack, and maybe even shift back or change form again really fast. Adds a layer of unpredictability.
Okay. So we've looked at what they are, these amorphous blobs, how they look like anything, how they ambush with the stickiness and teeth, and their basic stats. If we pull all this together, what's the big takeaway? Why should you care about mimics?
I think the core thing is how they weaponize the ordinary. They make the mundane environment itself hostile. The danger isn't some obvious monster growling in the corner.
Right.
It is the corner, or the chair in it,
Yeah.
or the door leading out. It forces you to distrust the inanimate, which goes against our usual instincts.
Especially in those typical adventuring locales, dungeons, ruins, maybe weird parts of cities. Suddenly every object is suspect. You can't just assume that chest is treasure or that lever is safe.
And their effectiveness comes from that combo. The almost perfect disguise, the way they can grapple you just by touch or with a pseudopod, and then the boosted damage once you are trapped. They're just incredibly efficient ambush predators.
It fundamentally changes how you have to approach exploration, doesn't it? You're not just looking down for traps on the floor, you're side-eyeing the furniture.
Yeah, it teaches a harsh lesson in paranoia if you survive the first encounter anyway.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, mimics, they're fascinating, they're dangerous, precisely because they exploit that comfort we have with just stuff. These roaming, hungry blobs of eyes and teeth can look like a chair, a door, a treasure chest, maybe even a giant pake.
Yeah, the kick one is still weird.
Just waiting for you to get close enough so they can stick you fast and start biting.
They turn a simple object into a surprisingly effective, even if instinct-driven, kind of death trap.
So, the final thought then. Considering they can show up in deep dungeons, but also maybe just in a city alleyway, and they can look like almost anything their size. Next time you reach for that lever, or go to sit in that dusty chair, or even eye up a suspiciously placed potted plant, how sure can you really be that it's just an object?